Tonight, more vaccine mandates.
Let's be clear. Vaccination requirements should not be another issue that divides us.
As the FDA debates whether to approve additional booster shots in the fight against COVID-19.
Plus, former President Bill Clinton in the hospital.
All eyes on Virginia, the state of the race in the Commonwealth.
Plus, the latest appeals court ruling on the Texas abortion law.
And the findings from a Biden commission exploring the idea of packing the Supreme Court.
All this and more tonight on Faith Nation.
The Johnson & Johnson booster shots gets the thumbs up from a key FDA advisory panel. Welcome to Faith Nation. I'm John Jessup.
And I'm Jenna Browder. The announcement about J&J boosters coming as the president pushes more vaccine mandates and public outrage grows.
Now, even as the Biden administration promotes the jab alongside his $3.5 trillion reconciliation bill, workers across the country are protesting everything from low wages and work conditions to new requirements in the fight against the coronavirus. CBN's Brody Carter is following the president's whereabouts today. Brody, President Biden is using his vaccine mandates as a way to try and save the economy.
John, Jenna, yes, in part, the president's strategy is bringing up the COVID cloud, and it would be to give wings to his multi-trillion-dollar budget reconciliation bill. He's been making that push in a handful of states, and today's stop in Connecticut was no different.
My Build Back Better plan is going to change that. It's going to cut the cost of child care for most Connecticut families literally in half. No middle-class family will pay more than 7% of their income on child care.
As Democrats continue negotiating the bill's price tag, now the Biden administration taking credit for the current COVID downturn. It's claimed that the Biden vaccine push has saved more than 100,000 lives and prevented thousands of hospitalizations. It's not enough, however, to slow down pushback against the mandate. The Republican National Committee and 24 attorneys general plan to sue the administration over the private sector part of this requirement. Clergy from Ohio, representing more than 100 churches, sent this letter to Biden advocating that people should have the ability to make their own health decisions. Stating that mandates cross the line, they point that freedom comes from God, not the government. In Texas, the governor issued an executive order banning mandates, a clear shot at Biden's mandate directive to all businesses with more than 100 employees.
But I'm calling on more businesses to step up. I'm calling on more parents to get their children vaccinated when they are eligible. And I'm asking everyone who hasn't gotten vaccinated, please get vaccinated.
The ongoing push is also leading to labor protests and walkouts. For the first time in decades, 10,000 employees, John Deere, striking over poor pay and work conditions. Next week, Hollywood expects TV and film crew workers to also strike. All this as COVID cases and deaths trend downward. The Biden administration plans to lift international travel restrictions to the U.S. in early November. John, Jenna?
All right, Brody Carter, thank you. Meanwhile, former President Bill Clinton is in the hospital tonight, but reportedly on the mend after a non-COVID-related infection. Hillary Clinton, his wife, was seen leaving the hospital in California after the 75-year-old former president was admitted Tuesday. President Clinton was sent to the intensive care unit at UC Irvine Medical Center for privacy and safety, not intensive care, and he's said to be in good spirits.
Democrats in the Commonwealth of Virginia consider the upcoming governor's race too close for comfort just over 2 weeks until Election Day. Terry McAuliffe, a former Virginia governor, leads Republican Glenn Youngkin by just under 3 points, according to poll tracker 538. The Virginia gubernatorial election is considered a bellwether ahead of the midterms. Traditionally, the party that wins the presidency loses in Virginia the following year. McAuliffe himself, the lone exception in decades, narrowly winning in 2013 after President Obama won re-election. Now, however, President Biden's poor approval ratings aren't doing McAuliffe any favors. The candidate recently distanced himself from Biden and other Washington Democrats, calling on the whole lot to get their act together. Meanwhile, Youngkin is also dealing with party division, specifically concerning the January 6th attack on the Capitol and claims of election fraud. The Republican candidate speaking out this week against a pro-Youngkin rally where attendees recited the Pledge of Allegiance to an American flag involved at the January 6th riot, Youngkin, though, did not attend the rally, but did condemn the use of the flag.
And with that, let's bring in our Friday Faith Nation political panel. Julia Manchester, political reporter with The Hill, and David Brody, CBN's chief political analyst. Both happy Friday. Great to have you with us. Julia, let's start with you. You, of course, are following this race very closely. Youngkin, he did come out and say, this is a quote, "It's weird and wrong to pledge allegiance to a flag connected to January 6th. Julia, given how close this race is, how much could this hurt Glenn Youngkin?
You know, I think it doesn't do Glenn Youngkin any favors. It's interesting the lines of attack Democrats and Republicans are going on at this point in the race. You know, earlier this week, last week really, we saw Glenn Youngkin and Republicans really seizing on Terry McAuliffe's comments made a couple of weeks ago at a debate saying that he did not believe parents should be telling teachers what to teach in schools. That really sent a shockwave, I think, through the Republican and conservative communities. They started rolling out ads, pouring money into the race. It really appeared to rile them up. However, fast forward to a couple of days ago, we see that Democrats are now getting riled up with that Take Back Virginia rally, where there was allegedly a flag that was pledged allegiance to, that was flown at the January 6th rally. Youngkin was not present there. He was never scheduled to be there. However, I think anyone watching that rally could really foresee how much Democrats and Terry McAuliffe would jump on that, releasing an ad less than 24 hours afterward and such. So definitely two issues that are really rallying up the bases right now. But I think regardless, it's going to be such a close race. And that should be a red flag for Democrats, because Terry McAuliffe was a pretty popular former governor when he left office, pretty well known. He's running against someone who was virtually not very well known at the beginning of the cycle. So it's very close, and it might not spell good news for Democrats going into the midterms.
David, Julia just alluded to the second and final gubernatorial debate between Youngkin and McAuliffe in that moment about teaching. Glenn Youngkin and Republicans have made this race largely about education and the role parents should play. David, smart strategy?
Yeah, for sure. He's gotten a lot of mileage out of it. And look, if you kind of hunker down on critical race theory and transgender bathrooms and ground zero on all of this is the Loudoun County School Board and the exurbs and the suburbs, that could be a winning ticket. We already know that some of the early voting that's already happened in Northern Virginia is not at the levels that it was in 2017 for Democrats. That's not good news for McAuliffe. So, things seem to be kind of going Glenn Youngkin's way as best they can in a state that is not blue Jersey, as we talked about the other day. It is a blue state, but kind of a light blue state. So I think it's setting up pretty well for Youngkin.
Yeah, we'll all be watching. That race is November 2nd. Let's talk about the president. His approval rating continues to sink. A new Zogby poll has him at 36%. As he's talking about this Build Back Better agenda and trillions of dollars in spending, this does cut into the leverage that he has. In Connecticut today, when he was giving his speech, he made a concession to, or it sounded like a concession, that he didn't think Democrats would get. He said $2.5 trillion. I think he meant $3.5 trillion of this package. But was that sending some sort of signal to the moderates like Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema, who, say this figure's way too high? Julia?
I think in a way it is, and a lot of other moderates outside of Congress, including Terry McAuliffe, speaking of the Virginia race, have said $3.5 trillion is simply too high. The problem with that is that you have progressives like Pramila Jayapal or Senator Bernie Sanders who don't want to budge on that. I was talking with Congresswoman Abigail Spanberger from a pretty competitive district in Virginia earlier today, and she was saying, look, we need to pass this infrastructure bill. It will have immediate effects. It will help Americans across the board. And, I think due to the fact that we have a Democratic president, it would help Democrats in the White House and in the House and the Senate. But now that we're held up by this $3.5 trillion reconciliation bill, that makes things much more difficult for Democrats, and they don't get to reap the benefits of that bipartisan deal on infrastructure that was reached earlier this summer. And Americans don't either.
Speaking of infrastructure and Americans, new polling from Gallup shows, thank you, Julia, for setting this up perfectly. New polling from Gallup shows more Americans now prefer a more limited role for government. 52% say the government is doing too many things at once that should be left to individuals and businesses. That said, though, David, are Democrats moving in the wrong direction with these massive spending plans that would drastically reshape and expand the federal government?
Oh, I think there's no question about it. They're overplaying their hand. I mean, this is what Democrats typically do time and time again. Republicans have done it too. I'm not saying they don't. But look, there's a reason that polling is at 52% of people wanting more limited government, because what they have seen is less limited government. They've seen a government kind of run amok on vaccine mandates, and it's not just COVID, but just everything under the sun that Joe Biden and his administration is doing. And so, you know, this is kind of the yin and yang, if you will, of kind of a course correction. People are saying, look, we might want some government in our lives, and we don't want this much government in our lives. And I think that's some of the polling that you're seeing. And it's directly a result of the fact that the Biden administration, remember, Joe Biden, instead of saying we the people, these are his words. He said, we the government. I mean, that's a classic line from Joe Biden. We the government. Believe this. No, the last time I checked, the Constitution says we the people, not we the government.
Julia, do you think this translates in 2022, the midterm races?
Yeah, I think it very well does. Look, you are seeing polling, not only Biden's individual poll numbers, but also polling as to how Americans feel the country's going. I believe there was a recent Gallup poll that showed that a plurality, at least, of Americans believe the country is headed in the wrong direction. Now, historically, right, Biden was already facing uphill battle being a first-term president, but this doesn't spell good news for him.
All right, Julia Manchester and David Brody, we are out of time. Thank you so much for your insights. We'll be back right after the break.
The fate of a Texas law banning most abortions in the Lone Star State may soon be in the hands of the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court already allowed the Texas abortion restrictions to take effect. Now the Biden administration is pushing the High Court to rule on the law's constitutionality. So far, the Texas law has outmaneuvered courts by putting enforcements in the hands of private citizens who are encouraged to sue anyone who assists in ending a pregnancy further than 6 weeks along, or after a heartbeat is detected in the womb. The push from the Justice Department comes after the failure of at least 3 DOJ attempts to block the law in federal appeals courts.
Well, here now, Chuck Donovan, president of the Charlotte Lozier Institute. Chuck, thanks for joining us tonight. The Supreme Court already weighed in, allowing the Texas law to go in effect. Chuck, what is it about this law that has made it so that judges and court panels keep it going? And is this attempt, this latest attempt by the Biden administration to get the High Court to halt the law, any different than the one before?
Well, I think it's because the stakes in this case are fairly high, to say the least. It activates when the unborn child has a heartbeat that has been detected by the abortionist. That could be as early as 6 weeks, something that many Americans don't know, certainly many women don't know. And the stakes are very high. And it also does something unprecedented, as you mentioned. It authorizes private citizens to bring actions, and apparently even citizens outside the state of Texas, to sue the abortion provider for $10,000 in maximum damages if they perform an abortion. The problem with the case is, though, you have to have a case or controversy. You have to have actual litigants. And what the Justice Department and the plaintiffs below are asking is for the court to kind of imagine what sort of case might happen and then make a ruling enjoining everyone in Texas from acting on this law. I don't think that's going to work. I think you'll see repeated attempts, but I think the focus should remain on the Dobbs case.
Yeah. Chuck, could the High Court rule on the constitutionality of the Texas abortion law? And if so, what could that mean for the pro-life movement?
Well, I think there's certainly a chance they can. You know, everyone wants to have money. We're a gambling society now, so people are putting their bets on which case will reach the court. My personal one, even though I'm not a gambler, is that it would be Mississippi, and it's 15 weeks law. And the reason is clear. The Supreme Court has certified the potent issue whether or not states may ban abortion prior to viability, which has moved 3 or 4 weeks since 1973. The science is overwhelming about what's happening to babies at that stage. They pump 26 quarts of blood a day. They interact with their environment. If they're twins, they interact with each other. That's the case I think the court's going to want to deal with first, and it will, in all likelihood, resolve Texas as well.
Chuck, since the law took effect in September, Texas women and even a girl as young as 12 have sought abortions in neighboring states, some driving hours through the middle of the night. Does forcing women to take such drastic measures actually lead to fewer abortions, or to the argument pro-abortion advocates make, does it potentially endanger women who are already desperate enough to make such a devastating decision to end a pregnancy?
I think we have to look at exactly everything that Texas has done. It's one of 100 laws that have been passed around the country. They cover a wide range of topics. Texas added $100 million to its pregnancy support budget. Texas is likely soon to be surrounded by states that will protect the unborn, possibly the exception. And the truth is that you have to go along with these laws. You have to have support for women. Texas is doing that. There are 200 pregnancy centers in Texas that have spent $33 million in the last year in pregnancy support, according to our new report. If we have an attitude of support, and by the way, the abortion industry wants to handle all this by shipping pills to minor girls. That's exactly the kind of thing a parent might want to sue an abortionist for doing in the state of Texas.
All right, Chuck Donovan with the Charlotte Lozier Institute. It's great to have you with us this Friday. Thank you, sir.
My pleasure. Thank you.
And when we come back, the verdict is in. President Biden's commission to reform the Supreme Court comes to its conclusion on packing the high court.
Welcome back. President Biden's commission on reforming the Supreme Court appears to reject the idea of increasing the number of justices on the high court. Congressional Democrats had called for expanding the court's count from 9 up to 13 in an attempt to rebalance the makeup of the Marble Palace. But the findings of the White House Commission's draft report said doing so may not achieve balance and would perhaps present, quote, considerable drawbacks. The 36-member panel met today to debate the draft released Thursday night. It does, however, appear to support term limits and a rotation system between the high court and the lower federal courts. Well, joining us now is Zach Smith, legal fellow in the Meese Center at the Heritage Foundation. Zach, welcome. The draft report leans towards rejecting the notion of expanding the size of the Supreme Court. Zach, does that at all offer any legitimacy to the commission and its overall work?
Well, thank you so much for having me on. Look, what I'm troubled about with this report is that the commission said its members were divided on the issue of court packing, which is adding justices to the Supreme Court in hopes of getting more favorable outcomes for a certain ideology or political party. The fact that the membership of the commission was divided on this very problematic question is very troubling, and I hope that the commission in whole will thoroughly reject this very problematic idea.
Zach, the draft also addressed case selection, the docket, and court practices, but it did focus heavily on term limits. It noted the U.S. is the only major constitutional democracy without fixed terms or a retirement age for high court justices. Zach, your thoughts on that? Can term limits help and, at the very least, make the court appear less partisan?
Well, I think one of the very interesting questions surrounding the term limits debate is whether this would require a constitutional amendment or not. Currently, the Constitution says that justices and federal judges shall serve during good behavior, which has been interpreted to mean essentially they have life tenure. And so one of the issues the commission is grappling with is whether this would require a constitutional amendment to change when and how federal judges and Supreme Court justices serve. And so I think this will certainly be a rather lengthy discussion surrounding the term limits issue.
Yeah. You know, conservatives have blasted this commission from the very beginning. Interestingly, it has some liberal groups now very upset. One organization responding to the draft as paralysis by analysis and promoting the status quo, which it said conservative support. Zach, what does that suggest to you about the commission's final recommendations? Will they fall on deaf ears?
Well, unfortunately, I think this entire process has been politicized. It's an attempt to politicize the court, an attempt to intimidate the justices into reaching certain decisions in certain cases pending before it. And all of that is very problematic. The Supreme Court is not a political branch of government. It should not be a political branch. The job of the justices is to faithfully apply the text of the Constitution, the text of the statutes, and interpret the laws as they're written. And so at the end of the day, again, I hope that the majority of the commissioners, a majority of Americans would realize that and reject any conclusions that really suggest otherwise.
Zach, recently we've seen justices from Amy Coney Barrett to Samuel Alito to Stephen Breyer, all different parts of the spectrum. They fanned out on what really feels like a PR resuscitation tour, attempting to refute the perception that the court is made up of partisan hacks now that Americans' approval of the court has hit a record low. Zach, regardless of the commission's work, does something need to be done to bolster the court's legitimacy and confidence?
Well, I think the best way the justices can bolster the court's legitimacy and competence is to do their job exactly as I described. Interpret the text of the Constitution, interpret the text of the statutes before them, and apply them to the case in front of them, and not to worry about poll numbers, not to worry about political considerations, because frankly, that is not the job of a Supreme Court justice. It's not the job of a federal judge. And to the extent justices or judges try to engage in politics, that's really where the harm to our constitutional system comes into play. And at the end of the day, that is how the legitimacy of the courts would be undermined.
All right, Zach Smith with the Heritage Foundation, you are a foremost expert on this topic. We appreciate you coming in this evening. Thanks.
Of course.
Coming up, swimming with the dolphins, hopping on a Harley, a unique form of therapy designed specifically for some of our nation's finest heroes.
Finally tonight, from the open road to the rolling sea, it's all part of a new Wounded Warrior Project program that encourages emotional and mental rejuvenation.
Rolling Project Odyssey is a 5-day mental health workshop that honors and empowers veterans struggling with PTSD, all while offering a once-in-a-lifetime experience. For example, veterans start their day swimming with dolphins, then hop on motorcycles to take to the open road to experience the Florida Keys. One veteran who went through the program said the Keys were always on his bucket list, though he never thought he'd experience them quite like this. And what a way to honor those veterans.
Yeah, it's so nice to see. All right, well, thank you so much for joining us this evening. We hope you have a great weekend.